Hello and welcome to the first Art in the City talk of 2020 and 21. Art in the City is a series of international artists' talks, which is co-presented by Fine Art UE, Bristol and Arnolfini. Just some of our previous speakers have included Lydia Barlow, Jeremy Della, Martin Creed, Rose Wiley, Martin Parr, Bob and Roberta Smith and Laura Provost. Coinciding with the Arnolfini's exhibition, Chantal Joffe for Esme with Love and Squalor, we're joined this evening by the artist Chantal Joffe, one of Britain's foremost painters, and art historian and creator, Professor Dorothy Price, who will be in conversation for the next 30 to 40 minutes, followed by an opportunity for questions from the audience. You can ask a question by typing into the Q&A button during the conversation, and then we'll stop probably at about 1:45, and we'll answer questions then from the public. So it's my pleasure to introduce Chantal and Dot, for those who are less familiar. Born in Vermont in America, Chantal Joffe now lives and works in London and is represented by Victoria Mirror Gallery. She studied for her MA at the Royal College of Art and was awarded the Royal Academy Wollaston Prize in 2006 and elected a Royal Academician in 2013. She recently created a major new public artwork for the Elizabeth Line station at Whitechapel titled A Sunday Afternoon in Whitechapel, which will be on view when the Crossrail station opens in 2021. Following her show at Arnolfini, she has a new exhibition opening at Victoria Miro, focusing on the act of ageing called Story, which will be open from the 10th of November. Dorothy Price is a professor of history of art at the University of Bristol and editor of Art History Journal. She is widely published in the areas of British art and German modernism, with a particular focus on women artists, with recent publications including Women, the Arts and Globalization, Eccentric Experience, and After Dada, Marta Hagemann and the Cologne Avant-Garde. As a curator, she's contributed internationally to exhibitions of German modernism, including the New Gallery, New York, the Schirmkünstler, Frankfurt, and the Museum Ludwig in Cologne, and many others, including the 2018 show at the Lowry with Chantal Joffe titled Personal Feeling is the Main Thing. Tonight's talk takes Arnolfini's exhibition, Chantal Joffe for Esme with Love and Squalor, which I was fortunate enough to co-curate with Chantal and Dot, as a springboard for their conversation. And we'll be exploring the intimate act of painting and portraiture. So on that note, I'll hand over to Chantal and Dot, and please ask your questions during the conversation.
Thank you, Gemma. Thanks very much for that introduction. I guess with no further ado, I mean, hopefully this will be a kind of rolling conversation between Chantal and myself. We share a lot of interests in common, which is, I think, part of our friendship, which is why I've had the privilege of working with Chantal a few times now and curating her work. And I wanted to kind of start off focusing very much on this exhibition at the Arnolfini that is on at the moment that has generated this conversation, and specifically talk to you, Chantal, about first of all the title of the show, For Esme with Love and Squalor, and a little bit, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how that title resonates for you. It's from the short story of the same name by J.D. Salinger, and I'm just interested and curious to know for you how it resonates in relation to your work a bit more. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Well, I guess the obvious thing is I named my daughter for the short story. So she was called Esme. I'm a big Salinger fan. And when I was trying to think of a title for the show, I thought about that, and I thought about it being paintings of her from, babyhood to now. And, so obviously the love was easy. And then the squalor, I'd had the group of sort of what I think of as trauma drawings, pictures of what I did not see, are drawings of a difficult moment for both of us, really. And in a way, I suppose that's the squalor.
Yeah, thanks. I was kind of, I obviously, when we came up with the title for the show, or you came up with the title for the show after we'd all kind of racked our brains for a while, and it seemed a very natural segue, and we all went off and reminded ourselves about the story as well. And, rereading it recently, I think one of the things that comes across for me is how kind of, certainly in the first few pages, and in fact kind of throughout, the kind of prescience of time, the kind of insistent recall of time is kind of present on every page, in virtually every sentence in the first few pages. He talks about he recalls very specific dates and very specific times for virtually all of the sort of memories of this encounter that the protagonist has with the 13-year-old Esme. And I thought that was really interesting. And I wondered whether you could say a little bit more about how time figures for you in relation to thinking about your work.
Well, I mean, the obvious things about time, about, you know, your child, the sort of speed with which children grow up, but also, I mean, the other thing is an afternoon with the baby can feel endless, and, you know, like that, you know, like it'll never end, you know, as they, I don't know, as you, so I suppose time was very obviously connected to the Salinger story, but also I reread it again for the umpteenth time today. And because Salinger's a soldier, an American soldier, sort of in Britain, then in Europe, something about the squalor aspect of him being a soldier suddenly seemed to resonate very strongly with the time we're in now. The kind of the weirdness of time under Corona, that suddenly seemed sort of very vivid to me, reading the story again. And also a lot of the latter, these paintings we're looking at now, for example, that were made under lockdown of Ez on her 16th birthday and so on. That sort of, they almost mirror childhood, that sort of endlessness of time, and then it flies past. So in a way, Corona times like that, like the day is endless, but then it sort of flips past us in a blink. So I would find during lockdown, I would sort of, you know, it was all I could do to get up, make tea, and then it was bedtime. You know what I mean? That sort of strange telescoping of time. So in a weird way, for Esme with Love and Squalor, the short story had so many kind of echoes. It's a very odd short story.
Yeah, I think what's kind of interesting for me as well is this idea that he's kind of, the story sort of, the memory of this, for those of you who don't know the story, basically it's a sort of narrated memory. The protagonist is invited, has a letter, he's American, he's invited to attend a wedding. He, on reflection, decides not to attend the wedding, but he tells the story of who the bride is and the kind of memory of the encounter of their meeting, where he's an American soldier stationed in the UK in Devon, goes to a tea room, well, goes to a church and listens to the choir, children's choir, then goes to a tea room for some tea, and a couple of the children from the choir come into the tea room, and he kind of they strike up a conversation. Esme strikes up a conversation with the narrator. And then it kind of zooms forward, doesn't it, in time, from that initial meeting. And it's a sort of fallout at the end of the Second World War with the Americans stationed in Bavaria. And for me, that's always really interesting because, you know, immediately kind of evokes this idea of the American liberation of the Holocaust camps, you know, of Dachau, for example. So there's that in the background. It's a very resonant short story, I think, and on lots of levels. And it's all about, in a sense, a sort of breakdown that this narrator is having, but that the memory of this encounter with Esme kind of is his salvation, really. It's kind of salvages him. And I thought that was really interesting, how memory has the ability to rescue you from trauma, I think. And that's really interesting in your work as well. I didn't mean to necessarily zoom off to the last room of the show, but in the last room of the exhibition at the moment, there's a series of works called Pictures of What I Did Not See, that you produced, Chantal. And those are a kind of memory of trauma, aren't they? I wonder if you could say a little bit more about those works.
Yeah, they were very, I mean, in a way they were quite uncharacteristic in that they were drawn literally from memory and from imagined memory. I'd had a kind of incident, I don't even know how to describe it, where I collapsed and was unconscious on my front step, where my sister found me and I was taken to hospital and I had concussion. And these are the drawings I was trying to, a couple of weeks or maybe a month after, actually the time is all quite hazy, it was only a year ago, but I was sitting around with a notebook and I thought, I have to find a way to be able to remember it. Otherwise, it's the kind of repressing the memory of it is going to haunt me forever. And if maybe, just maybe, if I could draw it, I could find a way through it. And so I had somebody give me a big box of oil sticks in my studio, maybe 2 years ago. And they'd sat around like sort of odd materials doing, I thought, oh, wow, I could use them, I'll try them, because they were completely alien material to me. And I sat at a table with some big sheets of paper and I started drawing. And oddly, it was odd. It's like I couldn't draw fast enough or hard enough. Like it was, I mean, it sounds sort of really naff, but they poured out of me like a bit like the thing itself, like just like pure kind of art therapy, I guess. They were truly cathartic, and I kind of drew in a frenzy. And it's funny because my daughter had looked after me when I came home, and she would sort of wander by sometimes when I was drawing, and I'd say, oh, was that how I looked? Or she'd go, no, Mum, you got the 90 wrong. You were vomiting into a different bucket, which was funny and kind of touching and painful and all those things. But actually, at the end of drawing them, bizarrely, I then thought, oh, I think there was a Charlotte Solomon show on in London at the Jewish Museum. And I thought, oh, I'll pop along to see that. And bizarrely, I thought to myself, oh, that'll cheer me up. I was feeling a bit down in the studio. And, you don't put things together, you think exhibitions, they make me happy. Anyway, I went to the Charlotte Solomon and I was wandering around. And of course, it's possibly the darkest show ever, but also the most extraordinary. And I realized she was literally saving herself through the drawing. She was literally hanging on to life and avoiding suicide in her case by exercising her own history and all kinds of things. So that, I don't know, it was those moments when you're in the midst of something and then you see somebody else doing it and you think, oh, okay, this is okay, I can do this, I'm allowed to do this. It gives you a sort of license, I think, in a way. So it felt, it did feel good, and it did do what I wanted it to do. It literally enabled me to move on, literally. And I'm not even sure what I think about that, about art as sort of catharsis or therapy, or that's an extraordinary one. It's literally, it's the window through which I think it's her grandmother jumps, committing suicide, and it's the rooftops of France, the red sort of tiled rooftops. She's literally drawing the darkest things in her life and the things she hadn't seen. And anyway, so I sort of stumbled around the show and left, sort of came out into Camden Town, and felt kind of both exhilarated and horrified, and kind of I don't know though. I also, during the making of those drawings, I thought, well, if art isn't somehow engaging you to that degree, there isn't much point in making it. You know what I mean? If it's not literally, if you're not burning to make it and it's not making you feel more alive and more glad to be alive, I was literally like, oh, well, I'm alive. This is how alive you can. Anyway, so that that's those pictures.
Thanks for that. For people who don't know, Charlotte Solomon was a German Jewish artist. Again, this kind of haunting back to the Holocaust. She died in the Holocaust eventually. She had a very, very tragic life, lots of suicides in her family. And for a period of time in the 40s, her therapist advised her to, just for a period of 2 years, in fact, advised her to try and draw and try and paint as sort of therapy. And she produced this extraordinary body of kind of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drawings, paintings, gouache, called Life or Theatre. Many of you may well know about her through Griselda Pollock's brilliant book that was published, I think, last year, about Solomon, and someone whom Pollock has worked on for a long time. And there was an extraordinary resonance, Chantal, I think, seemingly coincidentally as well, I think, between your drawings and hers, and the sort of, the blues that you use, the colour. I think the relationship between colour and form in the work is really important in those pastels as well, and gouaches.
Sometimes it seems a bit, it seems like hubris to do that, to compare myself to her, and I'm not doing that. I'm not. No. The sort of what she's, suffering isn't a kind of, I don't know, scale, I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to equate my, what happened. And I'm not, anyway, I guess I guess everybody sees things in pain that feel they can identify with without meaning they've suffered through the Holocaust or been, so it's complicated even claiming a relationship to her, I think. And I wouldn't wish to do that, if you see what I mean. I just want to say, it did make it feel that it was a thing you could do.
Yeah, I know, I can see exactly what you're saying. I think it's my privilege, I guess, as an art historian, to be able to make those connections. And I do make those connections in your work, which is part of why your work is very kind of fascinating to me. And it always strikes me that it's quite Baudelairean in many ways. There's kind of that famous phrase where Baudelaire says, to sort of the best artist seizes the eternal from the transitory. And they kind of, and I think, many of your paintings, particularly your large scale paintings, do that. They sort of monumentalize everyday encounters and relationships. So you have these very intimate sets of relationships, for example, between yourself and Esme, predominantly in this exhibition. And say in the sort of, in the second gallery in the show, there's the one of you and Esme sitting on the bed together. You're naked, she's clothed, you're very close, you're very intimate. It's a huge monumental scale of a painting. And then the bath painting, reading in the bath, next to it as well, where you're really trying to get some privacy and you're shooting her a look, which I particularly like. I wondered, whether you want to say any more about those paintings and the sort of the scale and the monumentality. I can see loads of questions coming in, and I know that Gemma will be dealing with some of these questions, I think, at the end, so we can come back to them. We'll just carry on talking, I think, at the moment. But yeah, could you say a little bit more, I guess, about the bath paintings and about that room?
Bath paintings followed on from the trauma paintings, almost sort of. I think in one way I was quite happy to be here. I mean, not to be sentimental, but I was literally happy in there. The everyday suddenly seemed pretty great. I mean, it always does seem pretty great in a way, but it's an up and down struggle to love the everyday. But now I sound like a Lurpak ad. But anyway, I've always loved Bonnard, obviously, and his bath paintings. There was that incredible show at the Tate the winter before, and I'd always wanted to find, and somehow making the trauma drawings had set me free to paint things that weren't quite, that weren't literal, I guess. And so I was able to invent more a bit and play more with space and, I don't know, paint some sense of truth. I felt like, sort of drag the truth out of memory and real and drawing in a way that I always feel Bonnard is, even though he's doing his tiny pencil drawing and then thinking about color with maybe some chocolate bar wrap, that kind of weird collage of real and imagined and memory that he is so extraordinary at doing. And I suppose, again, those paintings obviously have none of Bonnard in them in one way, but there were moments in them when they did have a sort of sense of maybe of my bathroom, which is really not like Bonnard's bathroom, and it's kind of, the toilet's nudged up against the bath, and Ez is trying to brush her teeth, and I'm trying to read my book, and it's getting cold, and something about the way water refracts, and foreshortens me. I mean, my body's not the longest anyway, but I'm even more kind of ridiculous. I really enjoyed making those paintings. They had a kind of joyousness, I guess, which I also associate with the Bonnards and Martha. Even though everybody talks about her obsessive washing and how ill she was, I'm not sure so much that I see that, though that probably is in them. I'm not sure when I see them, that's what I feel. So, I mean, also, I think I was also thinking about that very late self-portrait of Bonnard, where he's looking in the mirror. I think self-portraiture has always been important to me, but lately, these last few years has come more and more, a big part of what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yes, and it's very present, I think, in this particular exhibition. I like the idea that you're happy in these paintings. When you see these paintings, they make you happy. I'm really interested in those Bonnard paintings because of your because of you as a woman artist, an artist who's a woman, inhabiting the role of the subject in Bonnard's paintings. And, you know, that French modernism has been subject to a lot of feminist critique around the gaze of the male artist, particularly Degas and his models, and indeed Bonnard, and, you know, the sort of endless bathing and this endless kind of obsessive representation of Martin in the bath. And I love the way that you kind of flip those vertical paintings on their head and you re-inhabit that role. Do you see that as something kind of important to you, conscious for you? Are you, or is it just kind of a byproduct in a sense of your engaging with what Bonnard is doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm trying to think about, I think for me, painting is never, maybe never as, I think I can put the meaning on afterwards, especially with Degas, maybe even more, the kind of idea that I'm both Degas and I'm the model, but certainly that isn't what comes first. What comes first is the kind of, is their painting. So for me, the Bonnard bath paintings, it's literally that dazzle of standing in front of that green water and the weird cropping and the bath cutting the cat, you know what I mean? So for me, painting is, when I'm actually painting, is a non-verbal kind of, I'm not describing it very well, but I suppose it would be inaccurate to say, yeah, I think about these constructs, or you know, I'm not, I think always playing in my head somewhere is the sort of, yay, I'm doing it, you know, and that's pretty incredible. I'm a woman and I'm painting, you know, there's a bit of that as a kind of maybe an undercurrent, but not as the overriding impulse to paint, or as the painting of the bars, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes massive sense, actually. And it also kind of makes sense of your sort of enthralled, you know, the way that you're enthralled by Paula Morrison-Becker in the way that I am too, you know, the fact that she achieved so much in a period when it was very difficult for her as a woman who was kind of torn between. So Paula Morrison-Becker is, for those who don't know, she's an artist who in Germany who died in 1907, just after childbirth. She died very young, but she was prolific in her short life. She painted over kind of 500 paintings, if not more, lots of self-portraits, and she kept very intense diaries about her process and about how she wanted to be as a painter, and her sort of struggles between wanting to establish herself, to be, there's the famous quote, I'm going to be something, I'm going to make something of myself. You know, she has ambition, and then the sort of societal constraints around the expectation that she stays in Germany, in Worpswede, this tiny artist colony, gets married, and she does marry one of the painters there, and the expectation that she has children, and she wants children, but she's fascinated by children. She paints them a lot. But she wants to paint, and it's that kind of tussle, and I think that's really interesting. And I think we've talked about this a lot, haven't we, Chantal, about, you know, how Paula signifies for you. I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
Well, it's funny because I was struggling since, you know, how after show anyway, you struggle to paint sometimes. I do anyway, and so I got out this book, which is like just about that one painting, and I was looking at that self-portrait, and then I was thinking about, she was very influenced by Fayon portraits, you know, the Egyptian ones. I'm trying to find, so like that, and then I thought, oh, you know, sod it, I'll make another self-portrait. So I made another self-portrait, and I thought about Paula while I made it, and I thought about her and heavily pregnant, making that painting in October, I guess it must have been, in the wet, in Worpswede, in the gloom, and I guess, you know, and she doesn't know what's to come, but she's in that moment and she's painting, and it's always here. And that, of course, you know, goes back to ideas about time, and Fresno with Love and Squalor, and that is what painting does. It's that actual moment, you know, when Paula's heavily pregnant, imagining the baby, imagining how she's going to paint, you know, whether she's going to make it, you know, literally whether she's going to, I love that painting so much, the Munter. And she's literally painting her every day, isn't she? And I love his sandals. But I guess increasingly that is really important to me, that that sense that trying to, I guess the older you get as a painter, that there's no time to waste. There's a very strong sense, probably more, in a pandemic than ever, that if you're not doing what doing your best, trying your hardest to do the most truthful thing you can, even, and often for me, that's a balance between thinking, God, this is so crap that there's no point. You know what I mean? Trying to bore yourself enough to believe that there's even a point in picking up the brush to finish I don't know, I think for most artists, that's quite a hard balance, sort of enough self-belief to do it. But at the same time, you just get that moment of liftoff, and Paula, in that self-portrait obviously has that. And so I love that when you look at painting, you can reach back through time and feel that for them,
Yeah, I think that's really, and that comes through a lot in your work, sometimes overtly, sometimes more subtly. I think, sometimes it's overtly, like the After Degas series, the series of pastels, where it's very strong that you're looking at Degas and that you're kind of reimagining yourself. But then in a lot of your other paintings, it's more of a sort of sense of this kind of weight of history, if you like, and your kind of ability to position yourself and your portraits of Esme in relation to your thinking around other artists and how they paint. I wanted to delve a little bit more, I think, into the journey that the exhibition at the Arnolfini takes us on. It's in 3 distinct rooms for those of you who haven't seen the show. And I just wondered whether you could talk to us a little bit more about each of the kind of works in the room and the journey that the viewer is kind of taken on with you, Chantal.
Well, I guess the first room is very much Ez on her own. So Ez from the first painting I made of her as a newborn, and then through to her 16th birthday. So it's literally, and funnily enough, that painting's made, I think it was July, around June, July, the white dress. And then Ez didn't really want to be painted so much, or at all, really. And that was fair enough, I felt. And, obviously, that was right that she should choose that, if that was how she felt about. And that painting, it's funny, that painting, when I was painting it, Ez felt like a kind of warrior goddess to me, this kind of extra, but actually what the painting actually captured is the kind of anxiety and insecurity and fragility. Whereas that wasn't, and that's often for me what a difficult thing when you're painting, you're imagining and projecting in your head all these ideas and thoughts about the person. And then when you step back, it isn't any of those things. And that's a really hard moment when you sort of think. So anyway, I guess that's why I've been struggling to paint lately, because Ez has been a huge subject for me, and then she doesn't really want to be painted. Anyway, I did a bad thing recently because she said I could paint her if I did it, from my imagination. So I've been doing that a little bit, just, a tiny bit. So the other day, she wasn't feeling that well. So so I was sort of holding her. We're sitting in a park, and I was just, just resting her head on my arm, and I thought, oh, well, this will make a great painting, which is a sort of terrible aspect of myself, maybe, that to think like that. Anyway, so I thought I might show you, just for lively interest. I thought I might. So I did some drawings from memory. So that's, I don't know if you can see them. I'm trying to draw. And in it and above it, I've written the protective witch and Rapunzel, because I think that's what I remind myself of.
Mother Gothel.
Yeah, literally. I mean, it's weird because I've been painting my mother. I mean, that's more close probably to how we looked. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll just try to do a little painting of it. So I'll just show you. So I made some small paintings. So that's one, that's another. But I'm not really showing you them because I think that I think I'm more, I suppose I'm speaking to people who are trying to make paintings in this complicated time in a funny way. I sort of think to do anything right now feels like an achievement, to make anything, you know what I mean?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it was planning this exhibition was the one thing that kind of kept us all focused, didn't it, I think, in lockdown. And also what was great for Gemma and myself, having our sort of regular meetings with you, were sort of learning about all the things you'd been doing during lockdown, including and this sense that you converted your living room into your studio at home, and it was kind of you and Ez in the house in isolation pretty much, and so you turned again to portraits of yourself and Ez, and that's really, this show has kind of come out of that, I think, a lot, hasn't it? Even though some of the works weren't done in lockdown, some of them were, but I think it seems to me to feel like a show that was very sort of focused on that intimate relationship between you and Ez as a result of lockdown, which is quite different from the show that's coming up, I think, at Victoria Miro, which is about you and your mother more, which is called Story. But just to kind of return, I mean, this the self-portraiture is a kind of strong theme, as we've established in your work. I wondered whether you could say a little bit more about this particular series, and then in the exhibition itself, there's this series, a small selection of this series produced in 2018 when you painted one a day, a self-portrait a day, is that right? And this is a tiny selection during the breakdown of your relationship with Esme's father, and again it speaks back to this idea of trauma, I think, as well, and painting and trauma.
Yeah, also, funnily enough, I had been looking at, obviously you know Javlensky, the painter, who was one of the he wasn't really a Blue Rider so much, was he? He was a peripheral kind of...
With Verefkin, they were all part of the Blue Rider for a bit, yeah.
I'm not so good on that, but he'd done all these sort of heads, hadn't he? And he called them meditations, and they were all on little panels, and he was crippled with arthritis, wasn't he? Latterly, and he really struggled to paint at all. Anyway, I really liked the idea of just small heads, and the idea of literally, it was also a time when I thought, well, I've got to do something, and if in a day I make one picture and it's a self-portrait, I'll have done something. I will literally have done something. So if I make one painting a day, I'll have done something every day, and that will get me through the day. So I started the 1st of January, which is always a funny old day, and I don't want to make it seem like every painting I do is a kind of, self-therapy or something, but painting for me, if I don't paint, I can't hear my thoughts. And I realized that again yesterday when I started doing another painting, because I thought until I picked up the brush, it's like a bit of my brain is switched off and I can't hear what I'm actually trying to think. But as soon as I pick up the brush, I hear all the conversations that I've had late, everything sort of. So in an odd way for me, painting is literally it's like turning on a radio in my head and being able to think and being able to find a different relationship to the thoughts and to the images and to everything. So in every way, making these self-portraits was a profoundly helpful experience. And then they gathered around me. So I filled the room up, my studio, with them. And that was comforting too, to have all these me sort of, and people would come in and see them and go, ha, literally laugh. I had people laugh a lot and sort of say, wow, you don't feel good, or you're having a bad time. And I felt they missed the point, because to me, they were beautiful. And to me, they were they were like a bunch of myself, obviously, but they were also, I felt very comfortable having them around me in all their different shapes. And I didn't really want them. Normally I'm desperate for pictures to leave the studio, but I felt I wanted them there in their big crowd, you know, like discarded skins or something. I literally wanted them around. Yeah. Anyway, so they were, I liked making them and I liked having them, which
I like the
and
different
they were
moods.
really variable, and some were terrible and some were ugly and a lot were bad, but they did feel kind of true to that time anyway.
Yeah, and I think that you convey very well the different moods going on, and it seems, you know, there's a period,
Sleepy, sad.
and I mean, there's a period when they get lighter, you know, like this one in July and August, and obviously the light is different, and you've gone to New York by this time, so you've kind of decamped from London to New York as a sort of break, I guess, as a kind of it was quite a decisive, that was a sort of physically decisive break, wasn't it? I think that sense that I remember us talking about the fact that you'd booked a trip to New York just for you and Ez coming.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
I thought I forgot the vital thing you take yourself with you, you know, that classic thing. If I just go somewhere else, because I always associated New York with this very happy time, and I love New York, and I got to New York and I wasn't really very happy. So, you know, there were really great things about that trip, but Ez remembers it as being quite a hard time for both of us. But it was good too. It was good. And then literally I did put physical space between me and things that had happened here. And, you know, so it was good. It had good things about it. And yeah, I think the mood did lighten, and the heat and the sun helped. And I saw a lot of painting that helped. You know, there were good things about it.
Yeah, it always struck me that how that mood sort of shifts from, you know, visually it shifts when you move to New York. I don't know whether that's conscious or not. Oh, there's Degas Green in those self-portraits. And then what was, you know, and also in the show you've got then the lockdown portrait with your kind of sort of looking quite anxious, I think, in that.
I think I always look quite anxious no matter what, even when I'm cheery.
But also I think one of the things that's interesting about this series, and you talked a little bit about these small heads, and that sort of leads me nicely on to something I wanted to ask you about, which was about scale in your work, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, or ask you to talk a little bit about you know, I mentioned earlier this idea of your kind of Baudelairean seizing of the eternal from the transitory in your painting, and that for me is achieved in different ways. And one of the ways in which that kind of monumentality is achieved is the scale that you use and the zooming in and out, and the scale that your canvases afford, and that's quite interesting. So in the Bath paintings, you have these huge Bath paintings, and then you have these very small, intimate ones. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about your choice of scale in relation to what you're painting, or how you're feeling, or what it is you want to paint, or what the scale means for you, different scales of painting on different days. Or maybe maybe it's not one thing, maybe it depends on the day. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about choices you make in scale.
Well, sometimes it's literally I'm too tired to paint big. Some days all I can do to sit in a chair and paint a little you know what I mean? I'll sort of I love painting big. I like to be inside the paint, you know, like the physicality of it, and I like that. But you have to have a huge amount of energy sort of pent up to kind of, I have to work up to it in some ways. I think when I was younger, I had endless energy somehow, and I still make a lot of big paintings, but then I think there are probably quite a few days when I paint little. But I love big paintings. I love, you know, like the Titian show at the National. I love the scale of those paintings. I like that. I like to be physically inside the painting, and I used to think I could never make a painting big enough. You know what I mean? And then I ordered a panel too big to fit in the studio.
I was going to say, yeah, I was going to ask about that actually. So physically, how do you paint these large canvases? Do you get up on a ladder? I mean, what's the, have you got well, I haven't seen a rig and pulley system like Degas had in his studio. So, and what, I mean,
I've got a scaffold platform that I use, and I've got little ladders. Lately they're not, I've got long arms, I can paint, and often for the head, I'll be up on a little step ladder and stuff.
Because I guess
like the scaffold platform. Sorry.
So you don't like it, did you say?
No, because it's quite scary because you have some balance, it's on a sort of shelf thing and you're quite high up. And I'm always terrified they'll just find me rolled off it. Foot of it. But
and I guess in lockdown at your house, you didn't have that, right?
I didn't have a scaffold. I painted, the biggest thing I think I painted was about 2.5 meters tall, probably, because it was based on what I could get in the house. And I did a couple of, the biggish Esme and one of my sister. But
that's what I was thinking. The portrait of your sister was, And
it felt quite good to do that in the living room. I mean, it's odd. I don't really like to work at home. I feel there's a lot of pulls on your time, aren't there, if you work at home?
Yes,
especially I find that difficult. And the lack of privacy, and I love my studio a lot, so it was good to come back. I mean, I endured being at home, but I can't say I really loved to work at home.
And one of the things you did when you were at home, which was unusual for you, you focused on that little still life, didn't you? You bought
a little flower.
Yeah, do you want to say a little bit more about that? Because that was an unusual departure for you as well. And
it was, and it was quite. I mean, it was a little bulb I bought at M&S that came with its own jug. You stuck it in the jug, and then it blossomed, and it grew this really weird, sort of strange dark flower that wasn't the flowers, the leaves, and then that grew a tiny pink flower. It's like a sort of slightly monstrous flower, I thought. And I quite liked the way it had a kind of, it was like from outer space or something, and it was quite sinister in some ways, but it flourished throughout lockdown. So I painted it I painted a lot of paintings of it, and I kind of liked them in the same way maybe as the self-portraits, that it sort of, it literally marked a space of time from sort of March through till maybe July. You know what I mean? And I feel an affection for those paintings. I don't think they're very good paintings, but I feel affectionate to what they make me remember of that. I mean, I always want to look back on Corona. I want to pack it away into time, but it won't do that, will it? It just kind of, it won't be put away. It won't be put. No, it's kind of ongoing, and that's a hard.
But I guess, yeah. But at that point, I guess, I mean, the national lockdown was such an unusual thing for all of us to experience. And so I was really interested in the fact that, that your Corona flower, if you like, became this kind of, it became your sort of marker of this period in a way that a lot of us, you can tell from Instagram and social media, loads of people started growing things. We all, like, first weekend of lockdown, go garden the centre because they were still open, buy your seeds, plant your plants, and then eat them, and it was a sort of thing, wasn't it? I think lots of people.
It really was. But the slugs, I planted cucumbers and potatoes and courgettes, but they literally, every single thing got eaten by the slugs. And so I'm a really rubbish girl.
You still have the lockdown flower?
I still have that. It lives by my kitchen sink, and it's still got one wizened, sad little flower when I remember to water it. But it's determinedly. It's like the cockroaches will be left after Armageddon. It's like their old Corona flower will be kind of like.
Have you painted it since? Chantal, have you painted it?
No, I can't bear to. It feels, I'm so desperate to put it behind us that it determinedly, it's
interesting.
So no, I don't paint Corona. I've been painting some walnuts a friend gave me, which are really odd looking things. They're fresh, like fresh, not dried ones in their shells, and they're really like odd.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's been interesting in its own way.
And also, just another question I had about process for you as well was your process is really interesting, I think, because and you've kind of touched on this a little bit here and there, but you have different ways in which you paint. So you paint from life, but you also paint from photographs, and you also paint from memory, and sometimes a combination of things. And I'm wondering if how conscious those decisions are for you when you paint, whether and what each of those different kinds of approaches to painting offer or bring or contribute for you, and what do you prefer, or is there no preference? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, it does. I think everything has its own attraction for me. So sometimes, like most self-portraits I do in a mirror, and that obviously has a kind of, I guess, a kind of truth I like. And I like, you never look the same twice. And I really like that. And lately it's been quite dark in the studio. So I've been painting self-portraits that are quite, so you can see quite little of, I can't see myself properly. But then sometimes photographs have a really seductive quality, and they allow you a kind of freedom to kind of, they both tether you and let you go in a way that I find, and you can photograph somebody quite quickly and then go away and paint them. And I kind of, like a sunlit day on a beach, and you can be painting the light falling on skin in a swimming costume or something. And that in the studio, rather, whereas in the studio, you're kind of, from life, you're quite stuck with the real. And I quite like what photography can do for you. And equally, this slightly new weird thing of trying to paint and draw from memory, which I'm a bit suspicious of and I'm a bit anxious about, because I worry there isn't enough material to hold on to. And I worry there's a risk of becoming very self-indulgent.
Do you use your diaries to help when you paint from memory? Is it visual memory, or is it also when you reread, like you were talking to me about the trip we went on to Vorpswede, and you looked back at your little notebook and some of those memories that you wrote down from there? Do they help when you?
No, it would only ever be visual, kind of trying to remember like when I was doing Ez from memory, I was picturing how we'd sat on the bench, and I knew I was wearing a dark coat, and she's very pale, and I was trying to imagine her head laid back on my shoulder and my sort of dark hair against her paleness or something. I was trying to picture that. But it does make me worried. It started, the memory drawing, some of it also, there was, I used to see this woman who was a homeless woman sleeping outside on a mattress in just outside Angel Station. And I really wanted to draw her because I'd go by her most days and she'd always have a book, which was interesting. And then also her foot would be hanging out of the duvet that she'd slept in overnight. And she had nail varnish on her foot. And there was something so touching about her foot, against the duvet. And it looked so cold. And I noticed other people had brought socks and there was something. And I thought, in that slightly awful way, I thought, yeah, that makes a great picture. And so then, and I thought, and I had Ez sort of going, Mum, you obviously can't take a photo of that woman. Anyway, so I went away and tried to draw that from memory, the sort of mound of her duvet with this little naked foot hanging out. I'm not sure they really worked, but it was interesting to try, and it was interesting. And then I go back and I think, oh, what color, actually, when I went back to see her, I think, what color was her duvet? What color was the mattress? Was it stripy? And then one day I came back and the police had literally got rid of all the people who were sleeping there and put these hideous metal planters to stop them sleeping there. And that was, horrendous in a whole other way. There's something horrific about the fact that we live in a society where people have to sleep out, anyway, so that was a whole other thing. But probably something kind of bad about me going around trying to think I could draw that. But
then it's part of your experience, isn't it, living in London? And it is part of our experience in Western society, isn't it? Same. Indeed.
It's very shocking. It was shocking. There's that fancy restaurant in Angel, and there were people sleeping in tents. It's shocking. Really shocking.
On that rather sad note,
sorry, I've really managed to keep everybody's mood buoyant. Anyway.
I see Gemma has come back in, and I think we've got quite a few questions, it would seem to me.
I understand we have. I'm just waiting for those questions to be made available for me to see. Unfortunately, I can't see them at the moment. So I'm going to start, if that's okay, with a question of my own, which was, I was really interested, Chantal, in that you said during the conversation, you were talking a little bit about that idea of when works leave the studio, and some works you're sort of ready to let go of, and other works you feel that kind of you're sort of holding on to a bit. And I wondered what your relationship was really with the works now that you in the exhibition at the Arnolfini, now that they've left the studio, because I know some of them had been seen before, obviously, but some of them, with especially the trauma works, were being seen for the first time.
I feel it was weird to see them on the wall. I think in a weird way it was like a full circle of kind of, they'd lost their kind of sting or something, so it was good. It was a good thing to show them, because they'd lost the kind of, I kept them in the studio in a big sort of folder for a while, piled up, and when I saw them, it laid them out on the floor after putting them away for a while, it was kind of shocking at first, but now I don't feel that, and that was good. That was kind of a good thing. I feel, it's funny, like them and the Corona flowers, I feel quite strongly about, I don't want to look at them most days, but I feel quite strongly, about them, I guess.
And I know we had sort of a big discussion as well, sort of between the three of us, didn't we, about whether they were the right time for them to be seen, and whether that sort of, whether this show was the right show to put them in. And I think, and it was quite a last minute decision, wasn't it, really, that they went in the show. But I think it's interesting how many people, actually visitors, have responded to that, and I think have actually found it really cathartic themselves, actually, to see someone sort of being able to sort of work through and experience that. On that note, I have got access to the questions now, so I'm going to throw some at you from the audience. The first one was actually in reference to those works, which are on screen right now, which said, "I love your pictures of what I did not see series, and I think they're so interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about drawing and mark making as a way to express and move on from that trauma?"
Well, they were particularly, I had that, as I said, that box of oil sticks, I had pencils, I had pastel, and something about the weight of emotion in the drawing meant that I was literally drawing, I had, a graphite stick, and I would draw so hard that everything broke. I was squishing my way through the oil sticks. I couldn't draw hard enough. I literally couldn't draw hard enough. That's all I can say. I mean, the marks had to be as violent as the experience, I guess. You know what I mean? And that, weirdly, as the drawings went on, they didn't maintain that. I couldn't keep up that level of intensity, and actually, in a weird way, as I recovered through the drawings themselves grew softer, I guess. And I think that was part of it. It was part of the whole experience of making the drawings, was the intensity with which I was drawing.
That actually,
well, don't they? Sorry.
So that leads really well onto another question, which was actually asking you a bit about sort of what is it, the surfaces that you paint on. Someone was, asking, how does that kind of affect your mark making?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I've always really liked to paint on panel, on wood and stuff. And like those funny little paintings I just showed you, they were on very old bits of wood I had lying around that I'd already painted on. So they were so rough. There's nothing more pleasurable than painting over an old painting, because it has such a rough surface already. And I hate to paint off a bright white surface. I usually color the ground in some way or mess it up in some way. I like that apple green or pink. I mean, to be honest, I was drawing these at quite a lot of speed, so they were just cartridge paper or cardboard. They were nothing special, and you can see the fingerprints down the edges. I'm pulling them out of the pad and stuff. But yeah, I like changing. I always think if you change one thing in a drawing or painting, you change everything. The size of the brush, the colors you use, just anything really. You know what I mean? You have to force yourself to change, I guess.
And I think that's really interesting, actually, in relation to a lot of the questions actually have been focusing very much on that idea of kind of how you make those marks and the process. And another question which sort of follows on really nicely is someone was asking, are some things more possible in painting than in drawing, or vice versa for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think paint, or I think I'm always heading towards paint. Like, I like drawing a lot, and these are somehow quite painted drawings because they're not, they're certainly not carefully planned out, as you can see. And when I paint, I don't draw like that. I don't draw the kind of an underpainting, as it were. I paint, you know, from the get-go kind of thing. I don't know if I really answered that question. But
No, I think that does sort of give a really strong indication, and I think it's been really fascinating, actually, sort of working with you and sort of seeing that kind of process, actually, in terms of the way that you've talked about various works and how you've come to that point in them. Another work which someone really wanted to focus in on, and was one actually that you mentioned and sort of gestured to, that was going through when we were looking at the self-portrait series from 2018. It was the one, I think it's August Free, with the green in, the Degas green. And someone has asked sort of specifically if you could talk a little bit more about that use of colour and the mark making. They've said, you know, it's incredible and expressive, and they'd really like to hear about how you use colour, particularly in portraits.
I mean, I'm just trying to think how to find what, I mean, I like colour to be very clean. I like not to be muddy. I think when I was a student, I was always fighting. Oil paint has a funny way of getting dirty, especially on the palette. And as a student, I was always frantic to try and make it clean, because, you know, I love Matisse and people a lot, and still do, obviously. But the clarity of color was really important. So I had to sort of teach myself to, at one point, I only used paper plates as palettes, because then I could throw them out, because otherwise you end up, at the end of the day, when you're starting out, you always end up as a muddy, sludgy green. And I so badly wanted, so my way was I wash my brushes every half an hour, no matter what, however big or small I'm painting, because otherwise I can't keep the color clean. So keeping color clean is like, I guess that would be my catchphrase. I don't know. I just like, it's really important, and it's not natural to me. I'm not a very tidy person. So to find a way to keep things separate, and, you know, like to literally, you know, like have that blue be as bright, you know, and of course that's also about what you're putting next to it. Color doesn't come up, you know, it doesn't exist without its, you know, neighbors.
And I wondered, Dot, if you could just talk a little bit more about that particular work as well, because I know that was one that you talked about and wrote about in the catalogue, and it was one that you sort of were immediately honed in on as soon as we sort of started sort of including those works in the show.
Yeah, I did. And I did because just of the way, I wonder if we can get it up, that particular self-portrait. It's an August self-portrait from the series of small self-portraits. Neil, I don't know if, anyway. Yes, no, I honed in on it because of a memory, because of the memory of going to the British Museum with Chantal. We went to go and look at a Paolo Morzon-Becker drawing. Yeah, this one, perfect, thank you. We went to go and look at a Paolo Morzon-Becker drawing with Isabel Seligman, curator of prints and drawings, BM, really great curator. And we were all kind of, you know, loving the Paolo Morzon-Becker. But in the course of our conversations, did we start talking about Degas, or was that just a coincidence? I can't remember exactly. But anyway, she pulled out this amazing Degas drawing that the British Museum hold, where he had painted his ground green, and then he had, and it was this kind of really bright, virulent green, and it was like the green screen. It was exactly like a green screen that you get in movies, where, you know, it sort of, in movies it cancels everything else out, but in Degas' hands and in Chantal's hands, it really brings things to life, I think. And I was really interested in the way in which both Degas and Chantal use this color in just the right way, I think, for expression and for kind of impact, I think. Yeah, so yeah, one of my favorite paintings.
We've probably just got time for one last sort of question or sort of thing to before we sort of wrap up. But I mean, and it was one I sort of thought I might ask actually as well, which was to just, we talked a little bit about sort of during your conversation about how the two of you have sort of bonded, and sort of the artists that the two of you have both sort of been naturally drawn to, and artists that you have sort of both written about or painted about, and in different ways how that sort of that relationship has kind of been reflected in each other's works. And I wondered if there are any shows or artists that you've been talking about sort of very recently that you're particularly keen to kind of work on together in the future, or that you feel has started kind of a new exhibition or a new book or a new conversation.
Are we allowed to talk about this, Chantal?
I don't know we're allowed to talk about that, but we could talk about Artemisia.
Yeah, there is something, but we're not allowed to talk about it. But yes, we both have been, yeah. So whenever I go to an exhibition in London, and if it's not with Chantal, then, which hasn't obviously been happening for a long time because of Corona, and I've been going on my own, and I haven't gone very much, but I decided for Artemisia I would risk it all.
So bad about that. I was like, yeah, easy for me to say.
Yes, and I'm really glad I did. And as soon as I got in there, I texted Chantal because I had to, because I knew she would understand the emotional reaction and response and the intellectual response I had to Artemisia's being, really, and what she could produce in the circumstances she had, the things she underwent, and the same, when I went to the Dorothy Tanning show. I think you were elsewhere, Chantal, in an RA meeting or something, but I kept texting. So we do, that we kind of know, don't we? I think what we have shared.
Or the Helen Scherfbeck, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
That was really kind of. But I mean, equally, I don't think I knew Munter before I met you. I don't think I knew her work. And, like that, some of those paintings are so, I think the kind of history of art that we're sold as students, as being all white men, I think that is a strong, connection we have, is to sort of flesh it out and repopulate it, because they're all there. They just need to be seen. And I think that's probably, that was why the Artemisia was so emotional for me, was, when she's literally writing herself in and going, I'm here. Look at me. I'm here. I'm literally everywhere in this show, and I'm going to be here forever. That was so moving, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And the fact that, we know that there are so many more. I mean, she's presented in the National Gallery as this kind of exception, but we know that there's a context, and there are many, many other names that just aren't household names yet being the operative word, and that there's a lot of work to be done for feminists.
I don't want other female art students to grow up like I did, not knowing that. I really, really don't want that. I literally thought I'll always be not as good as a man. That when I was an art student, I thought, because that's literally how we were brought up, to think that women were never as good. They weren't there, or they weren't as good, and that isn't true. And I don't think young women artists do feel that now.
No, but I think it's important to keep reinforcing the message. It's that, like, the same thing, I would see certain roles in art history and in sort of institutions. I think, oh, well, I will never be that. I will never be director of the National Gallery, because I'm not the right fit. So there's always that sort of sense that there hasn't been in because we're both the same age, we've been up in the same generation, where we were told those opportunities and those positions weren't possible or available if you weren't kind of basically a white man.
You need to see it. You need it as an artist or a writer or a historian. You need to see that you can do that. You need to have people to hold on to you, to reach back to. You need Paula's and Elizabeth Catlett's, and you need those people, because you can't, you literally need them. They're like the bridge or the rope that holds you. You need them.
Yeah. And I think, as women, we're very good at seeking them out as well. I think that's the other thing, and then if you get the opportunity, then you sort of bring them into view again. And I think that's a generational responsibility as well, I think.
I agree. quite strongly. I agree.
Thank you both so much for bringing so many other artists into view as well as part of this discussion. I think it's been a really generous way to approach it. I was going to say, as well, as one of the greatest pleasures for me being involved in the project and the exhibition has been being able to sit back and listen to the two of you discuss all these, you know, fantastic women artists that I didn't know about as well. And so it's been lovely that we've been able to share that, I think, with the audience tonight. I'd like to say a big thank you both to Chantal and Dot for joining us this evening. It's been such an interesting talk and a really lovely way to kick off the series, really, for Art in the City. Just to let everyone know that our next Art in the City talk will be on Wednesday, the 4th of November, when we'll be joined by Sean Edwards, who recently represented Wales at the Venice Biennale. In the meantime, you have until the 22nd of November to see Chantal Joffe for Esme with Love and Squalor at the Arnolfini. It's also our last weekend as well, when you can catch Hassan Hajjaj The Path, which closes on Sunday, and you can book for both those exhibitions online at www.arnolfini.org.uk. So all that's left really for me to say again is a huge thank you for everyone.
Oh, she's gone.
Are we still on the screen, Dot?
We're still here. I guess some people are still, yeah, 48 people are still here, 49 people. Oh, she's back.
I'm back. I want to say thank you to you, Gemma, actually. I want to say a huge thank you to you, because it's been a privilege to work with you.
Thank you.
Likewise, yeah, and both of you. It's been great. It's been one of the loveliest shows to work on, hasn't it, I think.
Lovely. So thank you to all, and thank you for joining us. And if you are watching this, obviously, as a recording afterwards, then please be aware that the conversation and the chat function has finished, so you won't be able to ask questions. But obviously, do get in touch with the Arnolfini if you would like to find out more. So thank you.
Can I just quickly ask you? Yes, I've had a question about that actually from somebody. So it is recorded and people can log in and watch it. Great.
Yeah. So if you visit the Arnolfini website, you can direct people to the recording.
Fantastic. Lovely. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming. Bye, Chantal. Bye, Gemma.